We are now concluding our three-part series as we discuss Malibu Comics, Deep Space Nine, issues 21 through 32. So the regular numbered series ran for only 32 issues. They had some special issues as well as some mini-series, crossover with TNG. We'll discuss those at a later time. But how'd you feel about wrapping up this Malibu run?
It was good. It got better as the stories went along. I mean, with each issue, I think, was a little bit better.
Yeah, they were able to build on their understanding of the Deep Space Nine era of Star Trek. And I liked how they were able to develop characters a little bit more and even bring back some old friends. So let's discuss issue number 21, written by Dan Mishkin, with art by Rob Davis and Bruce McCorndale.
Okay, so this one we had an alien ship that had illegal drugs transported itself away, and there was a spatial rift on the station. I know I didn't really get much out of this one. What did you think?
I thought this was a filler issue.
Yeah.
The aliens were kind of odd. They almost felt like TOS aliens, like they didn't even fit into the Deep Space Nine universe.
Yeah, and these comics are still in the early years of Deep Space Nine, so they're still trying to feel their way.
Yes, some are really hit them out of the park, and some are just not so great. But highlights of this issue include, and I wish they would do this with current comics, this thing is filled with classic toys of the 90s, because this was the heyday of Star Trek toys in the mid-90s. There's a Star Trek Next Generation Inner Space series toys. Those are ones that you flip open the phaser and they turn into a little station, and Bird of Prey, you open it up and little men pop out. I mean, they're like portable play sets. And also, one of your favorite toys of the 90s.
And they're made by Micro Machines. And the ad says Star Trek Klingon to all of them, even though they're not all Klingon ships, right?
Yep, we have our collection of Micro Machines. That was a great era for miniature toys of that time. All right, how about number 22? Dan Mishkin and Terry Pallett, entitled Deep Space Mine.
So in this one, they had Quark pretending to be the station commander, and there were these other aliens that had this ultimate weapon that was called the Shatterer. And I believe it was Quark that was able to figure out that the aliens did not really have this ultimate weapon.
What do you think about
the story
this one?
was okay.
Yeah. This one actually felt like a Deep Space Nine episode, like one of the lighthearted Deep Space Nine ones.
The aliens were not very smart, and I think that's how Quark was able to figure out that they didn't really have the weapon that they claimed to have. There was a planet that was destroyed, but it was sort of, the aliens took credit for it, but they didn't really destroy it.
Did you get a feeling that they were sort of like Pac-Leds? I know that we mentioned that in the last episode of Deep Space Nine comics.
Yes, yeah, I did get that feeling. I mean, now that I guess Star Trek has come to, like, they make us picture these stupid aliens as Pac-Leds.
What I liked about this issue as well, we're continuing the tradition of having pen pals in the back. Again, wish they'd have stuff like this in the modern comics. I don't know if we could do that now, though. But it would be pretty neat, huh? Have people's email addresses, some of these things are... They're almost comical, the entries.
Well, now we can just, Facebook message people.
Yes, that is true. I mean, here's one entry. I'd especially like to hear from any Americans who like the Cardassians and are over 25 years old.
Really?
All right, now we're going to start the three-part series, starting with issue 23, and it continues in 24 and 25, entitled The Secret of the Lost Orb, with the team of Mishkin, Kirk, Reed, Bradford, and Welsh. What did you think about this trilogy?
This was good. This was about Bajoran orbs, and now the comics have done well with Bajoran stories.
This one I very much liked.
But I mean, one of the things too is because watching when the show first started, I had such high expectations for all the Bajoran stories, and they didn't meet my expectations. And then reading these comics with no expectations, then I mean, in some way, that's like, like where can you go but up from there?
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. I see where you're coming from.
So in these stories, we have what's called the war gods, and it's the planet called Ares, and of course they named it after the god of war, Ares. And there was also a man pretending to be a Bajoran, and they found out his name was Crockett. He was a human, and he was an interesting character, like to be a foil in these stories.
Remember his partner Tubbs?
Really? No.
No, what I liked about this, it's showing that whoever picked up the orb and their interpretation of the orb could have massive effects on the population. So the Bajorans were interpreting their saga of one of peace, but this other planet decided to interpret it on the side of war. So it goes into religious interpretation, and I think that's what made this series so interesting and parallel to our times.
That did make it a good story, because the people on the Ares planet, yes, they interpreted the prophets to be, well, I mean, what the Bajorans called prophets, but what these people on Ares considered, they thought that their gods wanted them to go to war. Their gods they thought war was good, that they should always be at war. They should wage war on other people, which is just the opposite of what the Bajorans got out of their messages from the orbs.
And again, this could be a Star Trek episode, and we would have loved it.
I think so. This one, the writer showed a good handle on good story writing and good Deep Space Nine.
So that's a 3-part saga. Deep Space Nine by Malibu Comics, 23, 24, and 25. That's totally a keeper. How about issue number 26 with the team of Clayton, Dowse, Davis, and Snyder? This one we had 2 stories in there. Do you remember we had an A story, so it would be the story dealing with Dr. Bashir, and then we had a B story with Harry Mudd's grandson.
Well, what you call the B story was
it's a secondary story.
The second story of in that book.
Yeah, it didn't tie in with the first story. A backup story, I should call it.
Yeah, or the second story that was in this comic, I guess. So what we have is we have these aliens that hated Cardassians, and we had this one Cardassian Gull that was about to become the Grand Gull, which we've never heard of before.
No, I think that was a bit of a stretch.
The Grand Gull.
Yeah.
Like the Grand Nagus.
Yeah. I thought the same thing.
But the story was okay, though. And then getting on to the next story about Mudd's pets. Now, wasn't that a part 1?
In both of these, they had the part 1 and part 2. So 26 and 27, you need both of them to get the beginning and end of both stories. So we had one was a medical story, and the second one, here we go again, with now a descendant of Harry Mudd trying to con people.
Well, it's
almost
very
a rip-off of Tribbles.
That's what I was thinking, based on the Tribbles episode, because, and I believe we have mentioned how Cyrano Jones in The Trouble with Tribbles is very reminiscent of Harry Mudd. So here we have Harry Mudd in a story that's like Tribbles, because he had they were called Meeps, the little aliens that were a nuisance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And keep in mind, this was before Harry Mudd on Discovery, of course. This was written in the 90s.
Yes. Well, this is his grandson. It wasn't Harry.
Oh, right. It's not the real Harry Mudd.
Yeah, it's a descendant of Mudd.
Yeah,
but it's the same, but it's just like his grandfather. I mean, I thought this was a little bit convoluted. I'm kind of mudded out right now.
No, well, the story was good for what it was.
It was more of a comedic break from the Bajoran trilogy that we just had. I think that's why they included this.
Yeah, possibly, and just making it a shorter story, just to have something entertaining.
And to work in TOS into the DS9 universe. Okay, the next issue, Number 28, quite possibly my favorite Deep Space Nine cover of this series.
It has Ensign Ro on the cover.
Beautiful artwork, and Ensign Ro is one of my favorite characters of all time, and she originally was planned to be on Deep Space Nine series. So to see her here, this was a showstopper for me.
What we understand is they actually basically created Deep Space Nine for her. She was supposed to be the main Bajoran on the station, but since the actress Michelle Forbes didn't want to do it, they created Major Kira to be the Bajoran, and it worked out well with her too. And now for this story though, so they had Ro as a Starfleet officer, but the way we remember her story ended on Deep Space Nine, or even on TNG was her last episode, where she was part of the Maquis. I mean, she left Starfleet.
Inexplicable.
Yeah, so Ro wouldn't
it's
have
just
been in
inexplicable, or it could have been more of a didn't line up with what the show was doing. It's possible.
I mean, the story could have
bit.
been written before that.
Exactly.
But as far as the release date, it was after.
Yes.
But it was a good story with her. So we do want to say that. Okay, so Ro came to the station to stop Maquis extremists.
And I like that. They're tying in the Maquis now with Deep Space Nine. So I love it when they have some kind of mentions or crossovers that make sense within the universe, especially for that timeline.
Yeah, it was very hard for them to make it tie in because the TV show kept changing so much. They kept adding more and more to it, and so the comics were trying to keep up.
How about issues number 29 and 30? Another return, the return of Thomas Riker, trapped on Cardassia.
Yeah, this was great because I've been looking for a Thomas Riker story because I'm just amazed at how the novels kept bringing back Riker's father, and I'm thinking, I think Thomas Riker was a more interesting character.
Mm-hmm. I think this was well handled.
Yes, showing what happened to him after the episode of Deep Space Nine, in which he was working with the Maquis, but he wound up being in a Cardassian prison. So this story is saying what happened to Riker after that, to Thomas. Well, in the Cardassian prison, they took him out of the prison so they could study him because they knew that he was a clone of Commander William Riker. They wanted to see if they were able to see how he was constructed so they could make a clone.
Well, I like the banter between Sisko and Riker on how Sisko was trying to encourage him, saying, don't give up here. I'm going to even give you a comm badge so you'll always be reminded of whom you are. You're not, there's no electronics in here. You can't communicate, but this is going to help you get through things. And I think they really got the characterization down of Sisko as well as Riker. They hit the nail on the head with this.
I thought it was a good idea. And the fact that Sisko, they put it early in the story that Sisko wanted a comm badge with all the wiring removed, and they didn't explain why at first.
Mm-hmm. But it just shows both sides of Sisko. He's really hard when he needs to be, but he's compassionate when time calls for it.
Yes, and reaching out to
Yes.
Thomas the way he did.
And also as a backup story, this is curious because it was co-plotted by Tim Russ, Enemies and Allies. We have Tuvok in the Mirror Universe.
And I thought that was a pretty good story, too. Now, I've always loved the Mirror Universe. So they explored again, this time with Tuvok and Bashir as being the main characters.
I thought it was a great crossover there because it would have been the time that Tuvok was going undercover.
Right, and because on DS9, the show, when they visited the Mirror Universe, they did show Tuvok there.
Mm-hmm. And also we have a backup article, and that's another thing that was pretty cool about this comic. Sporadically, they'll do that. They'll just have articles about characters, and to have a 2-part article about Thomas Riker was an enjoyable read. More of an editorial.
Yeah, that was interesting, too. I liked reading that.
Issue number 31 was a 48-page special. Loved the cover. I knew that this was going to be a fun one because we have Dax in her Klingon uniform with Kor.
So this was a good follow-up story with Dax and, concerning the albino and Kang and Kor and Koloth.
Gowron makes an appearance in here, so it's a very Klingon-centric issue. There's quite a few Klingon phrases and words here, and since it's a 48-page special, there was some extra room in back where they can give acknowledgement to Mark Orkrand for helping out with the issue, and they even give you a glossary of Klingon words.
Yeah, they said at the beginning that it has that glossary at the end of the story. So I found the glossary and I kept flipping back there, so to get all the Klingon words and understand what they mean. And it's good that they put the glossary in order, that the words appear in the story to make them easy to find.
Yeah, that was. And they gave acknowledgement to Lawrence Schoen of the Klingon Language Institute. And once again, we see that professionals are looking into fandom for help. I mean, we have friends that have attended the Klingon Language Institute, and it's so much fun to hear them converse in Klingon. So I know that those who have learned the Klingon language or are studying the Klingon language, this is a definite issue to keep in your collection.
Well, it's just a great Klingon story too, with Dax and
sure,
going to Kronos, and the whole story of the Klingon, and trying to honor the two that died, Kang and Koloth, right? Yeah, Dax was with Kor.
There's a short backup story as well by Jason Levine and Scott Sava. What did you think about that? Even the artwork is so different than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, they changed the artwork for the second story, and that was the one bringing back Dax's Trill friend. So another story about Dax's friends, which was interesting.
Brings up issues of prejudice, of how people can change within time. Very Star Trek laced of what the core values of Star Trek are. And this is, I almost feel at the end there was a lot of filler though, because it's like something that someone who's just getting into Star Trek would want to read about. It's just pages and pages of who the Cardassians are, the Romulan Star Empire, United Federation of Planets. It's kind of a weird place to put in this issue.
Someone must have just had the idea, I don't know, maybe they got a bunch of letters saying, that some people wanted more explanation of this. I mean, for us reading those articles, there wasn't a lot of new stuff in there, just reading about the Cardassians and the Romulans and who they are.
It's the type of thing I would expect out of the first issue, because you're expecting new people to pick up the comic. But to have an issue like this, that you'd have to watch the show in order to even understand this story, I thought the placement was odd.
It was. So you think that it was just filler, like they just had to come up with some way to fill up a few pages?
This is the end of the series, and this is one of the many reasons why comics collapsed in the mid-90s. Because look at the cover price. They charged it's a $4 cover price for a 1995 comic. So totally, yeah.
That's about as much as the novels were.
That's how much comics are now. I mean, just think about that. So that's virtually double what comics are now for a bunch of filler. So that second half, I didn't really care for as much. But the core story was great. Number 32, our final issue, by Dowse, Clayton, and Pallet.
So a rogue group of Cardassians planned to blow up the station, and Kira and Dukat were stranded together. This was a good story, examining Kira and Dukat.
I thought it was fantastic. They really got the characters down. And we're seeing that it's very, very difficult for Kira to forget the past that she had with the Cardassians.
It's sad that this had to be the last one, because it seems like this is like the best story so far, and it seems like it could be so much better if they had kept it going.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It really was. The final words where Dukat says, "Major, look, I know we can never be friends." And her response, "You're right."
Well, yeah. Another part of the story was how she broke her leg, and Dukat kept having to carry her or prop her up. I mean, an interesting little play there in the story.
And then there was a cover gallery. I mean, more filler. I really wish the story would have ran longer, but instead we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages of covers of all the comics we already have in our collection.
So it's like they knew that this would be the last one, right? I mean,
yeah, it seemed like that.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.